Gracias por sintonizar Tampa Hoy. Les saluda Gerardo Cierra. Estamos completamente en vivo en nuestras plataformas digitales tampahoy.com, Facebook, YouTube. Y es martes 18 de octubre y en solo minutos tendremos en esta pantalla directamente desde el Palm Beach State College en Lake Worth el debate entre los candidatos que corren para ocupar un escaño para representar a la Florida en el Senado de los Estados Unidos, el senador Marco Rubio y la excongresista Val Demings, para hablar de cómo llegan estos candidatos a este debate, para discutir un poco las plataformas que tienen estos candidatos y conocer un poco también de ellos. Se encuentra conmigo Vladimir Kislinger. Vladimir, muchísimas gracias por acompañarnos. Gracias también a usted que nos acompaña a través de nuestras plataformas, Vladimir.
Y justamente Gerardo hacía todo el esfuerzo para, con mis problemas de miopía, compartir esta transmisión histórica porque hoy tendremos la oportunidad de acompañar durante toda la hora un debate muy particular. Y un debate particular porque, para los que no lo saben, en la Florida hay dos puestos al Senado. Dos puestos que en este momento han sido tomados por dos republicanos, por Rick Scott y por Marco Rubio. Ahora, uno de esos puestos le toca ser renovado este próximo 8 de noviembre, es decir, exactamente a 3 semanas de las elecciones de medio término, y es justamente la curul del senador republicano Marco Rubio quien se enfrenta a Val Demings, esta reconocida congresista del centro de la Florida, de una ciudad además que quiero muchísimo, que es la ciudad de Orlando, y en una contienda que esta noche veremos por primera y única vez, porque es el único debate que se va a llevar a cabo, Gerardo, en la previa al Senado, a esta elección de la curul del Senado de los Estados Unidos, pero esta curul que le pertenece a Florida.
Y estamos a solo semanas de esas elecciones que van a marcar no solo un cambio en la política de los Estados Unidos en este momento con los resultados, pero también están marcando el paso para las presidenciales del 2024, que también eso será un termómetro perfecto, dirías tú, de lo que podría ocurrir en el 2024, estas elecciones de medio término?
Totalmente, Gerardo. Es importante destacar que no solamente hay una, digamos, se está optando a la reelección de Marco Rubio o a la elección de una nueva senadora, sino que prácticamente todo el país está bajo el pulso electoral de unas elecciones que, dependiendo del resultado que ocurra, dependiendo de ese resultado, se sabrá prácticamente por posición adelantada, como le decimos en fútbol con nuestros hermanos hispanos, se sabrá cuál será la orientación potencial de los electores de cara a la elección presidencial del 2024, una elección presidencial que no está totalmente definida. Por un lado tenemos un Biden que ha dicho, el presidente Joe Biden ha dicho en 3 oportunidades ya que se va a lanzar a la reelección. Hay dudas, incluso en el Partido Demócrata, de que eso sea así. Y por otro lado tenemos un Donald Trump, tenemos a DeSantis, entre otros candidatos o precandidatos que también han manifestado su interés. Sin embargo, algo interesante es que se está escogiendo, por ejemplo, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 puestos a ser reemplazados en el Senado. Tenemos a Ohio, a un puesto en Nevada, a un puesto en North Carolina, a uno en Wyoming, a uno en Georgia y a uno en Florida. Entonces, estamos hablando que pudiera haber una recomposición en el propio Senado, y ustedes lo conocen muy bien. Tenemos la Cámara Baja, que es el Congreso, la Cámara Alta, que es el Senado, donde se toman decisiones trascendentales para el país. Muchas veces hablamos de cómo se traba o destraba un juego político cuando desde el Poder Ejecutivo no se cuenta con el apoyo del legislativo, en este caso hablando, por ejemplo, del Senado. Ahora, de la Cámara de Representantes, es decir, del Congreso, se está escogiendo 3 curules, y a gobernadores hay 6 estados los que están en juego de cara a las elecciones del próximo 8 de noviembre.
Vladimir, y estamos en medio de un año en el que se han destapado temas que dividen a las masas. Estamos hablando del aborto, inmigración, los precios altos de todos los productos debido a la inflación, la Reserva Federal con su alza de tasas, que es un parece ser que los estadounidenses no tendremos un respiro para la economía en los próximos años. Estos temas trascendentales y definitivamente muchísimos más están en las plataformas de estos candidatos. Vladimir, conozcamos un poquito más acerca de estos candidatos. El senador republicano Marco Rubio, como tú bien lo decías, es el senador titular por la Florida junto a Rick Scott. Antes de ser elegido para el Senado, ha sido comisionado de la ciudad en West Miami, también fue elegido para la Cámara de Representantes de Florida, de la cual luego se convirtió en presidente en el 2006, un candidato político con mucha fuerza, con mucho alcance, sobre todo en la comunidad hispana, que es tan grande y sigue creciendo en el estado de la Florida. Y estamos hablando también de la excongresista Val Demings, como tú mencionabas, esa ciudad tan importante en la Florida como lo es Orlando. Ella se ganó el cariño de esa ciudad, siendo la primera jefa de policía de la ciudad en 2007. También estuvo sirviendo como congresista del 10º distrito para la Florida, antes de ser elegida para la Cámara de Representantes de los Estados Unidos en el 2016. Ambos candidatos, Vladimir, tienen una experiencia cada uno en lo suyo, pero son caras familiares, son caras conocidas en Washington.
Sí, son interesantes. Marco Rubio con un futuro político, digo futuro político porque escasamente tiene 51 años de edad, digamos, un senador que tiene una particular fuerza en la población cubana. Y por qué no hablar de otras poblaciones hispanas, como tú bien lo comentabas. Pero por eso es que, de alguna manera, Marco Rubio ha entendido que el sur de la Florida es un nicho natural desde el punto de vista político, aunque lo hemos visto también con bastante soltura, digamos, dar una buena vuelta o varias vueltas por el resto de la Florida, incluyendo acá la Bahía de Tampa, donde, por cierto, a través de Noticias Tampa Hoy, hemos tenido la oportunidad de entrevistarlo de manera exclusiva. Un hombre que tiene 11 años como senador. Algunos criticarían eso y es perfectamente entendible, otros lo aplauden. Algunos incluso dicen que Marco Rubio sigue siendo presidenciable. No para el 2024, pero sí probablemente una década, por ejemplo, que puede sonar muy lejos, pero realmente la vida política una década no es nada. Mientras que por el otro lado tenemos a Val Demings. Ella tiene 65 años, además de ser la primera jefa de la policía de Orlando. Fueron 27 años desde la fundación, desde la consolidación de la policía de Orlando para hacerse jefa de la policía de Orlando. Duró 23 años como miembro activo de la fuerza de la ley, de la policía. Además, primera dama, esposa de Jeff Demings, el alcalde de Orlando, y ya tiene 5 años como congresista. Una mujer que particularmente ha acompañado los derechos de la comunidad LGTBQ. Es una mujer que ha acompañado el derecho pro aborto, la posibilidad de decidir si quieres o no tener a tu hijo. Y algo que yo creo particularmente que va a ser el punto más polémico del debate de hoy. Creo porque ella cuenta con un fuerte respaldo por parte de habitantes de la Florida que están en contra de la prohibición del aborto, y recordemos una prohibición que es a partir de la 15ª semana. No es que está prohibido el aborto completamente en la Florida, es solo a partir de la semana 15. Sin embargo, sin duda alguna creo que es el punto más altisonante. ¿Por qué? Porque es local, número 1, porque ha sido aprobado recientemente, número 2, y porque ha contado con el apoyo, digamos, sumamente impactante por parte del Partido Republicano, un partido que tiene un portaavión llamado Ron DeSantis, y que sin duda alguna esto va a hacer que confluyan todos estos elementos, a mi modo de ver. E insisto, me estoy atreviendo a pronosticar, casi que como si fuera el clima, qué es lo que va a ocurrir en apenas menos de 20 minutos al sur de la Florida con este debate. Por otro lado, y para darte el paso, Gerardo, con el senador Rubio hay 2 elementos particulares que vamos a ver muy probablemente el día de hoy. Sin orden de importancia, el primero sería el de la migración. El senador Marco Rubio, al igual que Ron DeSantis, al igual que Trump, al igual que el Partido Republicano en general, al igual que el gobernador de Texas, Abbott, todos han criticado la política migratoria del presidente Biden. Y Val Demings ha apoyado todas, 100%, las políticas del presidente Biden. Por lo tanto, casi que digamos, por añadidura, a ella probablemente le toque, le pegue este elemento. Y en segundo lugar, y este sí creo que es el punto más importante para los electores en los Estados Unidos, el bolsillo, la economía. Ese es el punto más importante y uno pudiera decir, ¿qué poder puede tener un senador de la Florida en la decisión de cara a, digamos, a las políticas económicas? Pues muchísimo. Muchísimo puede, porque además entendemos que desde el Senado salen las leyes que pueden inclusive ayudarnos a salir de esta crisis que estamos presentando en este momento.
Vladimir, y estamos acá definitivamente para eso, para analizar desde nuestro punto de vista, desde la información que nosotros compartimos todos los días a través de nuestras plataformas, ya sea digitales como el noticiero. Es una experiencia que nosotros disfrutamos y que nos apasiona. Describir desde nuestro punto de vista nuestra lectura de las situaciones. En este caso, tú traías un punto, la cercanía de la excongresista Demings con el presidente Biden. Sí, recordemos que el presidente Biden ha tenido en este año fuertes críticas en los puntos que tú bien los has mencionado, desde el aborto, desde los derechos de las comunidades LGBTQ, ni hablar el tema de la migración. Y te hago esta pregunta, Vlad. Para la comunidad hispana, ¿cuál es tu lectura de cómo llegan estos candidatos? Y tenemos resultados preliminares, obviamente, de encuestas que podemos discutir un poco más adelante, pero ¿cuál es tu lectura de cómo llegan estos candidatos? Tú mencionas que el senador Rubio, y sabemos, eso no es un secreto, que es muy querido en la comunidad hispana, pero ¿cómo llegan tanto el senador Rubio como la excongresista Demings a esta carrera para los hispanos?
Bueno, de cara a los hispanos, en ambos casos vemos con particular interés cómo las comunidades, por ejemplo, la comunidad puertorriqueña, que es una comunidad sumamente grande e importante en el centro de la Florida, una de las más importantes que tiene el centro de la Florida. Bueno, la congresista Val Demings cuenta con un apoyo fundamental con esta comunidad. Pero no solamente eso, la comunidad hispana LGBT, y me disculpan cuando se me va alguna letra, también cuenta o apoya a Val Demings, esperando, por ejemplo, que se eche para atrás, diciéndolo en criollo, leyes como la Don't Say Gay, que es esta famosa ley que ha sido aprobada también por el Senado, en este caso el Senado estatal, y firmada por el gobernador Ron DeSantis. Sin embargo, ambos, Marco Rubio y Val Demings, tienen un punto: si quieren ganarse, si quieren meterse en el bolsillo la comunidad hispana, justamente tienen que hablar de bolsillo. Porque hemos retratado acá, por ejemplo, cómo proporcionalmente la población hispana sufre con mucho más fuerza elementos como la falta de vivienda, los aumentos en la renta y la imposibilidad de poder adquirir una propiedad, no solamente por las tasas de interés que ha subido la Reserva Federal, sino también por la propia inflación que se ha generado, la falta de programas para ayudar a las minorías, entre otras. Entonces, mucho más que hablar de migración, mucho más que hablar de frontera, porque no somos un estado fronterizo, esa es la realidad. Lo más importante, lo determinante aquí, vuelve a caer en el peso del dinero, de las finanzas, de la economía. Además, entendiendo que es un estado que tiene 6 millones de hispanos. Es bastante importante la población hispana que nosotros tenemos acá. Y, por supuesto, aparte, y esto lo dije hace minutos, la importancia que reviste ver a un senador que es de origen cubano, y por lo tanto ya nada más hablando de ese tema, digamos, arranca con un poco de ventaja. Esto no quiere decir que tenga que ganar por ser hispano de ninguna manera, pero también esto lo lleva a, digamos, a buen término. Entonces, insisto, todo pareciera indicar que lo que va a ocurrir hoy va entre los principios morales conservadores a los liberales, que esto es importante entenderlo, donde tendremos dos polos diametralmente opuestos. El polo de Rubio defendiendo principios conservadores, el polo de Demings defendiendo las libertades individuales, sean las que sean, excepto la del armamento, porque irónicamente ahí sí vamos para atrás. Pero, por otro lado, también hablaríamos del tema económico. Tenemos a una Demings defendiendo el paquete billonario, trillonario del presidente Donald Trump, un paquete que ha sido criticado por los republicanos porque dicen, hey, de algún lugar va a salir este dinero. Esto tiene que, sin duda alguna, costarnos a la larga, a la corta, como lo querramos ver, nos va a costar. Y el mejor ejemplo es lo que ocurrió con el COVID. Cuando vimos esta cantidad de cheques que se emitieron desde la administración Trump, no estoy diciendo que sean del presidente Biden, desde la administración Trump, pasando por Biden, un dinero inorgánico, y para todo el que sabe un poco de economía, sabe que un dinero que no ha sido producido por la economía es inorgánico, y al ser inorgánico, contamina el ambiente económico y, bueno, perjudica. ¿Qué es lo que está pasando? Vemos a una Reserva Federal que ha aumentado, ya no sé, Jerry, 5 o 6 veces ya las tasas de interés, y pues todavía seguimos por encima del 8%.
Cambia completamente los factores que podríamos considerar normales en una economía y ante una situación sin precedentes como lo fue el COVID, se necesitaban también acciones sin precedentes y fue una decisión bipartidista en su momento aprobar estos millonarios paquetes que estamos sintiendo los efectos el día de hoy, Vladimir.
Totalmente.
Y hablemos un poquito también de otro tema fascinante que es, entremos ya un poquito en ese tema de las encuestas, que es imposible no hablar de lo polarizado que está esta campaña completamente cuando tú hablas de un Trump, de un Biden, de un DeSantis, de un Christ, también cuando tú ves las plataformas de la misma Val Demings y el senador Marco Rubio, tú ves la polarización y un punto que quiero mencionar es esa ventaja que tú mencionabas. Y es una ventaja que muchos creían que el senador Marco Rubio iba a tener desde el momento en el que se postuló como candidato nuevamente para el escaño al Senado de la Florida, pero en el momento en el que fue elegida Val Demings como su contrincante, los expertos creían que ese margen iba a ser mucho mayor. Para sorpresa de muchos, el margen que han tenido estos dos candidatos es mucho menor de lo que se esperaban. ¿Qué es lo que estamos viendo en esas encuestas, Vladimir?
Y tiene muchísimo sentido, Gerardo, porque aunque ahora se está ampliando el margen, quiero decir, cada mes se va midiendo el desempeño de cada candidato, y en este momento hemos visto cómo comienza a separarse. De hecho, voy a atreverme a ver si se ve, porque a veces tengo problemas cuando presento estos papeles. Vamos a ver. No, cuesta muchísimo, pero estamos viendo esta línea roja. Esta línea roja es la línea del candidato Marco Rubio, la línea blanca es la de la candidata demócrata Val Demings, y vemos cómo de acercarse, veíamos un punto donde estaban relativamente cerca, vemos cómo esta brecha se ha ido ampliando conforme han pasado los últimos meses. Estoy hablando de agosto, septiembre y octubre. ¿Qué pasa? Val Demings ha contado con unos recursos con los que no contó Marco Rubio. Esto es el primer elemento. 2, Val Demings no tiene el desgaste político que tiene Marco Rubio. Aquí estoy hablando ya como analista político, 100%. Hay un desgaste natural del político en funciones, a diferencia del político candidato. Aquel candidato puede ser candidato toda su vida, vamos a Gustavo Petro en Colombia, y no hay desgaste más allá del natural en términos de campaña. Pero entonces tenemos una cantidad de recursos importantes que permitieron que la campaña de Val Demings tuviera cierta fuerza, un desgaste natural de Marco Rubio, y hablemos de méritos propios. Val Demings es una mujer, ya lo habíamos dicho, sumamente respetada en la comunidad de la Florida Central. Una mujer que no ha dejado mal a su región. Y una mujer que apoya unos principios que son liberales, que son apoyados por millones de personas también. Entonces, aunque este estado es más conservador que liberal, aún así hay un grupo importantísimo. Pero Cuando yo me voy a 538, que es una de las encuestadoras, de los centros de encuestas más respetados del país, ellos presentan, y esto fue una recomendación de uno de nuestros colegas, presentan de 10 a 15 encuestas, todas tomadas desde agosto hasta finales de septiembre. Todas esas encuestas, menos una, dan como ganador a Marco Rubio. En este momento, al 10 de octubre, hace escasos días, la ventaja de Rubio por encima de Demings era de 4.6 puntos porcentuales. Es decir, lo redondeamos, 5 puntos porcentuales. Eso está por encima del margen de error. El margen de error muestral se calcula aproximadamente más o menos 3 puntos porcentuales. Es decir, si aún le sumamos el margen de error, Marco Rubio gana. Sin embargo, acá no se gana así como en el fútbol, sino hasta el último voto del día de la elección. Por eso es que es tan importante el debate que vamos a presenciar en solo minutos. Son las 6:54. En 6 minutos, en teoría, comienza el debate, y seguramente va a ser así, el debate al Senado de los Estados Unidos. Entonces, antes del debate, 4.6. De acá a mañana, veremos si eso cambió.
Y también hay que tomar en cuenta esas que lo miden estas encuestas, y no sé si tú tienes esa información que es crítica en el momento de la elección como tal, esas personas que se están contabilizando que aún no han decidido o que su respuesta es que no quieren a ninguno de los dos candidatos, que suman esos 3%, 4%, que sumados muchas veces son los que definen estas elecciones.
Y aquí te digo algo, discúlpame, es que la política es un tema, ¿no? Desde que Donald Trump se hizo presidente, en Estados Unidos se fortaleció un concepto que no era común, que es el voto oculto. Eso era algo que veíamos en Europa, que veíamos en América Latina, que veíamos incluso en el Medio Oriente, pero que nunca vimos en los Estados Unidos. Y aquí quiero hacer una salvedad. No estoy diciendo que para el momento en que Donald Trump quedó como presidente electo de los Estados Unidos, las encuestas se habían equivocado. Para nada. Ellas daban como ganador a Donald Trump. Pero en términos numéricos, salió más gente a votar por Trump de la que se esperaba. En este caso se habla de los ni, como decimos nosotros en América Latina, ni son de un bando ni de otro, los indecisos o los votos ocultos. Si yo sumo esos tres, pudiéramos estar entre el 4%, que tú bien lo comentabas, hasta el 8%. Entonces, si yo sumo el error muestral, y discúlpeme que hable de estadística pura, del 3%, más o menos 3%, más la cantidad de votos que todavía no han decidido 100%, puede haber un cambio el 8 de noviembre. Por eso es que tanto Demings como Rubio no dan por sentado quién es el que va a ganar, porque en efecto todo puede cambiar.
Y es esa ventaja tan pequeña la que ha sorprendido a analistas políticos de todos los si se puede decir, bandos, y de todas las en toda perspectiva ha sorprendido
todo el espectro político.
De todo espectro político. Ha sorprendido definitivamente lo reñida que es, que está esta batalla política en la Florida. Y Florida también se ha convertido en un termómetro para las elecciones en general en todos los Estados Unidos. Vladimir, estamos a punto de arrancar, pero no nos podemos ir sin antes hacer esta pregunta. ¿Cómo llegan los demócratas y republicanos a la elección del término medio en general en este noviembre, este 8 de noviembre, que está a la vuelta de la esquina?
Wow, o sea, a tu pregunta delicada, una respuesta mucho más delicada, porque va a variar, va a depender de cada estado, porque hay estados donde no puede pasar por el frente un candidato demócrata, pero hay otros estados donde son altísimamente valorados y respetados. Lo que sí te puedo decir es que todo está en juego. Absolutamente todo está en juego. No solamente el Senado, no solamente el Congreso, no solamente 7 estados están en juego, tan importantes como Arizona, por ejemplo, tan importantes como Georgia, tan importantes como Florida. Son estados cruciales y estados donde hemos visto cosas interesantísimas. en la elección presidencial en la que ganó Biden, Georgia, que es un estado fundamentalmente republicano.
Considerado un bastión republicano.
Oh, sorpresa.
Arizona.
Así es.
Otro, normalmente otro bastión republicano.
Por lo tanto, y aquí jugando a la varita mágica, estamos hablando de una especie de plebiscito, lo que estamos viendo en este momento. Porque son bastiones que, siendo republicanos, decantaron por el lado demócrata en la reelección, posible reelección de Trump, y se fueron con Biden. Algo que nadie se imaginaba. Absolutamente nadie. Es como decir que California vote republicano. Entonces, y estamos viendo justamente, adelante.
No quiero interrumpirte, terminemos esa idea y vamos a dar paso a lo que estamos viendo en este momento.
Lo que estamos viendo en este preciso instante, seguramente veremos un ejemplo que vamos a extrapolar a las elecciones del 2024, las elecciones presidenciales. Esto va a ser una muestra, así que les invitamos a estar muy atentos a lo que se diga en este primero y único debate al Senado de los Estados Unidos, uno de los 2 escaños que se están jugando para este 8 de noviembre.
Y estaremos después del cierre del debate con nuestras impresiones de los resultados de nuestra lectura de lo que sucedió en el debate. Vamos a ver qué es lo que está sucediendo en este momento desde West Palm Beach, desde el Palm Beach State College en Lake Worth. Vamos a tratar de recuperar esa señal que nos llega completamente en vivo y estamos directamente en vivo.
Congresswoman Val Demings, Decision 2022, Before You Vote, U.S. Senate Debate, made possible by Florida Press Association, these proud partners, and statewide sponsors. Now, tonight's moderator, WPBF 25 News anchor, Todd McDermott.
Good evening, and welcome to our audience from around the entire state, live on television, streaming and listening on NPR Florida. This is Decision 2022, Before You Vote, the U.S. Senate Debate. We are live from Duncan Theater on the Lake Worth Beach campus of Palm Beach State College. Welcome to our candidates, Congresswoman Val Demings and Senator Marco Rubio. We are so appreciative for your participation tonight. Also joining me are panelists, Vicki Sacheri, Executive Editor of Florida Trend, and Rick Christie, Executive Editor of the Palm Beach Post. All three of us will be asking questions of the candidates tonight. The debate rules tonight: each candidate gets 60 seconds to answer a question and 30 seconds to answer any follow-up questions. Rebuttals are 30 seconds in length and at my discretion as your moderator. Candidates, when you see the yellow light, you have 15 seconds to finish. The red light means exactly what you think it means. And I'll remind you that it means stop. Congresswoman Demings, you won the coin toss earlier this week. The first question tonight goes to you. 3 weeks ago tomorrow, Hurricane Ian hit Florida as one of the 5 most powerful storms to make landfall in the U.S. What federal action is needed starting now to protect Florida from sea levels projected to rise a foot or more in less than 30 years, while more frequent monster storms threaten our lives and livelihoods?
Well, thank you so much for that question, and let me say good evening to all of you. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Palm Beach State College. It is an honor for me to be here. I stand on this stage as the daughter of a maid and a janitor who grew up in Florida. Had the honor of serving as the police chief in the House and now standing on this stage. I grew up in Florida, so I know all too well the devastating effects that hurricanes can cause on our state. And number one, we have got to get serious about climate change. Climate change is real. If we don't do something about it, then we're going to pay a terrible price for it. More intense storms like we've seen as the waters in the ocean continue to warm up, more intense storms, more flooding, more just devastation as we've seen with Ian. I've toured the area and I've toured Puerto Rico and seen what Fiona did. The federal government has got to make sure that FEMA has the resources that it needs to adequately respond, but we've got to get serious about climate change.
Thank you very much. Senator Rubio, the same question as you. I'll repeat the question. It was 3 weeks ago tomorrow, Hurricane Ian hit, one of the 5 most powerful hurricanes to ever make landfall on our country. Federal action starting now to protect Florida against sea level rise projected up to a foot in less than 30 years, while these monster storms just continue to hit us.
And first of all, I also want to thank the college for hosting us here tonight, all of you for being a part of it, everyone for being here in the audience. This is important. I'm glad we have a chance to do it. You ask about the hurricanes. Unfortunately, if you're in public service in Florida, you won't be here long before you're dealing with hurricanes, and we've done so consistently throughout my time in public service. And unfortunately, back in 2017, we had devastating storms, 2018 as well, and now the devastation and destruction that we're still calculating. I outlined last week a very specific plan, obviously it's preliminary, on all the sorts of things that we're going to need help on. These communities immediately need emergency relief. What's happening for a lot of these cities and counties is they have to spend a lot of money up front. Money out of their budgets they have to spend right now to pay for these things, and then they get reimbursed. And so that's why I'm very proud that in 2017 and again in 2018, I was able to get President Trump and the federal government to fully reimburse our counties for the help they needed. But we'll have to do more. There'll be 2 phases. The first is emergency response, meaning all the things you need as an emergency to help these counties backfill their needs. And then there'll be the long-term recovery. And I'm very proud of the fact that I was involved deeply in all the long-term recovery efforts of the last storms as well.
All right, that's time, sir. Thank you. We're going to move on to question number 2. And Senator, this question begins with you. Democrats passed the $2 trillion American Rescue Plan with no Republican support. Now inflation rates, not seen in 40 years, show no clear sign of abating. Prices for just about everything, housing, gasoline, groceries, are way up. A Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco analysis shows injecting trillions of dollars in pandemic relief into this economy caused up to 3% of what is approaching a 9% U.S. inflation rate. And it's worse in Florida. What can you do to help families now?
Well, I think the first thing we have to start doing is stop spending that kind of money. We had already done 2 pandemic reliefs. This came on top of it. And they were warned. The Democrats were warned by Larry Summers, by other Democrat economists, you do this, you're going to fire up inflation. So that's number 1. Number 2 is we've got to begin to produce American oil again. Why are we begging Saudi Arabia for oil? Why are we begging Venezuela and Iran for oil? We're producing 1 million barrels a day less on oil than we used to do just a couple years ago. Instead, we are depleting our reserves. Our oil reserves do not exist to win midterms. They exist to help this country in an emergency or in the midst of a storm. What we cannot do is some of these crazy policies that are coming from the left that Congresswoman Demings has supported. You know, she supported a plan to put a $10.25 tax per barrel of oil, which would have meant 35 cents per gallon more for everyone listening here today. We can't do that kind of crazy stuff. It only adds to the inflation. I think it begins by winning this election and getting people like that out of office.
And that's time. Congresswoman, the same question you may answer, but you have 60 seconds to answer this question.
Thank you so much for that. Of course, the senator who has never run anything at all but his mouth would know nothing about helping people and being there for people when they are in trouble. No one planned the pandemic, but our response to it is everything. Individuals were hurting, families were hurting, businesses were hurting. We passed the CARES Act, which the senator supported. There were some problems in the CARES Act with the Paycheck Protection Program that you love to take credit for. Some say it was poorly written. Some say it didn't help the people that it was supposed to, didn't save the jobs that it was supposed to. There was a way to fix the problems in the PPP through the American Rescue Plan and help people that were in trouble. But you played politics, Senator, and you did not do that. Your number 1 job as a United States Senator is to protect the health, safety, and well-being of the American people. You've been at it for 24 years.
Senator Rubio.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, we passed the Paycheck Protection Plan when Democrats were sitting at home in the House. They were in their pajamas doing Zoom calls, and we were in the Capitol. And we were working in the Capitol to solve real problems. The Paycheck Protection Program was a bipartisan victory. If we hadn't put that plan together, and we had to do it very quickly, in a Capitol that had no staff, we had to put it together in 3 or 4 days, bipartisan. It got unanimous support, including the Congresswoman, who voted, I guess, remotely or whatever they did. Because the truth of the matter is that if we hadn't done that, we would have had a meltdown. We would have had a meltdown in this country. We saved millions of small businesses. I am incredibly proud. It is a bipartisan achievement. Had we not done it, we would have had a depression in this country. The Congresswoman likes to talk about helping people. She's never passed a bill. She's never passed a single bill. She's been in Congress for over half a decade. She's never passed a bill, not PPP, not anything. Not a single bill she's passed has ever become law. I'm proud of the fact we saved millions of jobs. I'm proud of the fact we did it in a bipartisan way.
That's not true. I know the senator, look, and I'm really disappointed in you, Marco Rubio, because I think there was a time when you did not lie in order to win. I don't know what happened to you. You know that is not true. My first term in the United States House, I passed legislation to help law enforcement officers with mental health programs. Your first term in the Senate, you voted to turn Medicare into, basically to abolish it, and then turn it into an underfunded voucher program. And then you gave the biggest tax break to the richest of the rich and said you'd pay for it with cuts to Social Security and Medicare.
Running out of time, I'll give you 30.
No, this is an important topic. So number one, and we'll fact check it. I'm going to put it on my website now, and all of you can love, the media loves to fact check. There is not a single federal law on the books that she sponsored and got passed. Not one. I think she named 2 post offices. I've done that too. But she's not passed a single federal law. That's number one. Number two, in terms of the tax, you know what we did in 2017? Do you know why today in Florida and across the country, working parents have a double child tax credit from what they used to have? Because I single-handedly got it passed. Because I took on my own party, even the editorial boards had to recognize it. I took on my own party and we doubled the child tax credit. And I took on my own party, the Wall Street Journal, even corporate interests. So I'm very proud of my record. In the last 12
you there, Senator.
Todd, may I respond to that?
Congresswoman, yes.
Look, the senator has obviously resorted to lying, cheating, and trying to steal. But it's embarrassing that you think that honoring a person who is a hero by naming a federal building after them is nothing. I think honoring a police officer who was killed in the line of duty is everything, Senator. It matters to his family, it matters to his community, it matters to his department, it matters to me. I think it's sad that it doesn't really matter to you.
Both of you, we need to move on.
I know, but I did not say it didn't matter. I said that that's all she's done. That's all I said, that's all she's done.
And
I, on the other hand, have helped save
matter.
millions of jobs.
We're going to move on.
And by the way, the lying and the cheating, the lying will be, the lying is going to be fact-checked. I'm not sure where I'm cheating or stealing.
The next topic, and the question goes to you, Senator.
All right, great.
In an August interview, Senator, you said, quote, abortion is the killing of an unborn human being, and that you do not believe the dignity and the worth of human life is tied to the circumstances of their conception. You've now signed on to fellow Senator Lindsey Graham's bill for a national abortion ban. My question to you specifically is, if reelected, if your vote can make a federal abortion ban with no exceptions the law of the land, will you vote yes?
Number one, I'm 100% pro-life. Not because I want to deny anyone their rights, but because I believe that innocent human life is worthy of the protection of our laws. That said, every bill I've ever sponsored on abortion, every bill I've ever voted for, has exceptions. Every one of them does, because that's what can pass, and that's what the majority of people support. Now, what was before us today in Congress that you talk about Lindsey Graham's bill, that's a 4-month ban. Okay? That is more lenient than every country in Europe, except for 2. The extremist on abortion in this campaign is Congresswoman Demings. She supports no restrictions, no limitations of any kind. She voted against she's against a 4-month ban. She voted against a 5-month ban. She supports taxpayer-funded abortion on demand for any reason at any time up until the moment of birth. That's what she supports. That's the extreme position here. I have shown a willingness to work with people to save unborn innocent human life. She opposes any limitation of any kind, and no one ever asks them about that.
Congresswoman Demings.
Senator, how gullible do you really think Florida voters are? Number one, you have been clear that you support no exceptions, even including rape and incest. Now, as a police detective who investigated cases of rape and incest, no, Senator, I don't think it's okay for a 10-year-old girl to be raped and have to carry the seed of her rapist. No, I don't think it's okay for you to make decisions for women and girls. As a senator, I think those decisions are made between the woman, her family, her doctor, and her faith. And to sit over, or to stand over there and say that I don't support abortions up to the time of birth is just a lie. But to help protect the life of the mother, which you looked at that like it was just, that's kind of a side issue. Senator, you know that you have said you don't support any exceptions. But what you're saying tonight...
Yeah, number one, the bill that she's attacking me on has exceptions. It has exceptions. That's the bill right now. Number two, you want to talk about extreme? Let me tell you about extreme, because you talk about extreme. Here's extreme. Okay, a child that's born alive after a failed abortion. It happened 11 times in Florida in 2017. It happened 8 times in 2020. A child on a failed abortion born alive. And we had doctors in America that refused to treat or provide medical care to a child born alive. And we tried to pass a law that said that should be a crime. That's infanticide. The abortion failed, the child was born alive, and you refused to treat it, and she voted against that. That's how extreme she is. And she still will not tell you. You should ask her, what limits on abortion will you support?
Congresswoman?
What we know is that the senator supports no exceptions. He can make his mouth say anything today. He's good at that, by the way. What day is it, and what is Marco Rubio saying? I've said time and time again, and he knows it, that I support a woman's right to choose up to the time of viability.
Senator, before we go, I want to get back to the original question, because I understand that you said you have supported legislation that has exceptions, and that this particular bill that Lindsey Graham has drafted and you signed on to does have that up to 4 months. But I asked you a specific question. That is, if you get the chance in another 6-year term to vote for a federal abortion ban with no exceptions, would you vote yes if it would make it the law?
No, listen, I've already told people what I don't believe that the value of a human life is determined by the circumstances.
Right, I gave
but the law that can pass in this country, I'm interested in saving human lives. And that's why every law that's out there has exceptions, including the one that she's attacking me on has exceptions. Every law I've ever passed has exceptions. We're never going to get a vote on a law that doesn't have exceptions, because that's what the majority of the American people are, and I respect and understand that, and that's what I support. But she still, you haven't asked her, no one here's asked her, she still won't answer what specific limits. She's never voted for a limit, not after 4 months, not after 5 months. And by the way, on the issue of exceptions, I'm being attacked on a bill that has exceptions. It's written right in there. My name is on that bill. My name is on that bill. There's a reason why no bills are ever introduced without exceptions.
That was asked,
because that can't pass without that in there, and I understand and recognize it, and that's why I have continued to support bills that have exceptions. But she supports no limits of any kind. That is out of the mainstream. That is radical. She supports letting a doctor let an unborn baby, a born baby born alive, and the doctor doesn't have to treat it?
That's time. Another minute to you, Congresswoman Demings.
Marco Rubio has been clear that he supports no exceptions, even in the cases of rape and incest. He said it time and time and time again. But what I can say to him, and I can say to Florida, we are not going back, Senator, no matter how obsessed you are with the woman's body and her right to choose. We are not going back to a time where women are treated like second-class citizens or like property. And I'll say it again, because obviously he didn't hear or he doesn't want to. I support a woman's right to an abortion up to the time of viability.
So, can you ask her if she'll support a 24-week ban? Will you support a 24-week ban? Because you didn't support a 20-week ban. You didn't support...
Up to the time of viability.
But when is that? That's the vague language they all give. And then they talk about the doctor and the family. Let me tell you who else is in that room, that abortion room. The government is in that room because she brought them in there. She wants the taxpayer to pay for that abortion. That's government involvement. Not just to pay for that abortion, but to pay for them all over the world.
For a woman and our girls.
That's a radical...
I believe at this point we're going to move on. I'm going to ask that you both allow me to move on with this debate.
We still didn't hear what limits she supports.
This next question comes from Rick Christie, executive editor of the Palm Beach Post.
Good evening, Congresswoman Demings. Just today, a New York Times Siena College poll shows voters overwhelmingly believe American democracy is under threat. A Washington Post analysis shows election deniers are running for office in 48 of 50 states. The New York Times poll also shows more than 2 in 5 registered voters, including 37% of independent voters, are at least somewhat comfortable in voting for a candidate who says they don't accept the results of the 2020 election. Will you accept results of the 2022 election?
Let me start here, if I may. My mother, the maid and a janitor, worked long, hard days, but I can never remember a time they did not vote. If our car wasn't working, they would pay somebody a couple of dollars to take them to the polls. Why on earth would we try to stop them from voting? They were able to vote because of our democracy, the wonderful system of government that we have. No, it is not perfect. But our system of government is what allows us to be here tonight. We have to do everything within our power to uphold the Constitution, protect the rule of law, and protect our democracy, and protect each person's, Republican, Democrats, and independents, right to vote. That's what I did as a police officer and a police chief. I took an oath that I would protect and serve, defend the Constitution, not just for people who looked like me or the richest of the rich, but for all people.
All right, Congresswoman, that's time. The same question goes to Senator Rubio.
Yeah, first of all, I don't know who the rich are, because my dad was a bartender at banquets and my mom was a janitor, so we have that in common. And I will tell you this much. I've never denied an election, ever. I've never said an election. I'm not like Stacey Abrams in Georgia that denied her election. I've never denied an election. I think in Florida, we have great election laws, but I think elections have to have rules. And Congresswoman Demings supported this effort to have a federal takeover of elections. What would that look like? You can't ask for ID. You have to ask for ID to get into her neighborhood where she lives, and that you have every right to have that. But you can't ask for it when they vote. Allowing people to drive around with a trunk full of absentee ballots. Allowing people to basically register on an hour before the same day of the election, show up and vote and inject chaos. We have to have rules and we have to have laws. And those laws have to be followed. Florida has good election laws, and we have record turnout, like they had record turnout in Georgia, which they were out there calling some sort of segregationist Jim Crow bill. No, these are rules. These are rules that allow people to have confidence that their vote counted and their vote mattered. They're not suppressing anyone's vote. They are rules designed to make sure the system works the way it's supposed to work.
Let me just get you on record here that you will support the results of the 2022 election.
We have great laws in Florida, absolutely.
But will you?
Sure, because I'm going to win, so I look forward to supporting that. But
we're moving on.
But yes, no matter what the outcome is, I'll support it because Florida has good laws. They're not the crazy laws like they have in Pennsylvania and these other places.
I want to go to Vicki Sashary from Florida Trends Magazine.
I don't think we gave Congresswoman Demings the...
I believe we're going to move on here to the next question, and that's Vicki's question.
Good evening. 6 homeowners insurance companies have already failed in Florida in 2022, putting more pressure on Florida taxpayer-backed citizens property insurance. They're now insuring more than 1 million properties in the state and counting. As the insurer of last resort, the collapse of Citizens would be a catastrophe for Floridians. What should be done on the federal level to avoid this?
Who's the question for?
Senator Rubio.
I'm sorry. Okay, so obviously this is a state issue, but here's a couple things that I would say. The first, the flood insurance program, which is critical. A lot of the people that were hurt in the storm did not have flood insurance. Not only we have to go back and reauthorize it every year. We shouldn't have to keep going back every year. It should be permanent. We should also reform the system. Florida actually pays more into the flood program than it takes out. You talk about the property insurance issue. It is a state issue. The federal government, you don't want the federal government involved in property insurance, believe me, okay? But I will say this to you. We are, I believe the number is about 8 or 9% of the roof claims in America. We are 83% of the roof lawsuits in America. And so what's happening to these insurers is the cost of litigation. They're saying, I'm out in Florida. And look, I worry about it. My property insurance is up at the end of this year. And other people should be worried about it because when your property insurance goes up, if you can't afford it or you don't have it, the mortgage company will force place you. And your mortgage could double. So we are facing a looming crisis. I think it's something the state has to get their arms around. But I am certainly in favor of not just reauthorizing, but reforming the flood program, separate from the wind, the flood program, and reforming it so that Florida is treated fairly.
Senator. Congresswoman, you have 60 seconds to answer this same question. Would you like it repeated?
No, I don't, but thank you so much. Vicki, let me tell you, as the senator works very hard to say it is a state issue, that doesn't mean at the federal level we should not care about what citizens in Florida are going through and try to do something about it. Marco Rubio has spent more time at the state level than certainly any person on this stage. So it's interesting to hear him say how that's such a state issue. Well, what in the heck did he do about it when he was the Speaker of the House or serving? He's been in elected office since 1998, and insurance in Florida has tripled, and people are suffering. I sent a letter to Governor DeSantis saying, yes, I know it's a state issue, but how can we work together to lower the cost of property insurance for Floridians? because people are suffering. We got to prepare for the next hurricane. Are we going to wait and do nothing? I asked him to call a special legislative session to talk solely about this issue. We have got to get the property
insurance
down.
Senator Rubio, I want to give you 30 seconds to rebut.
Well, first of all, when I was in the state legislature, if we want to go back to that, we actually had a special session, and we passed a reform. You know who the governor was at the time? Charlie Crist, your gubernatorial candidate. I think you've endorsed him. So you should ask him if it didn't work. But we certainly supported it, and we certainly made it happen. So that's number one. Number two, I would say that, trust me when I tell you guys, trust me when I tell you, a federal government that struggles to deliver the mail in a regular and consistent basis in parts of this country, you don't want them in charge of your property insurance. We would be the only state in the country that's asking the federal government to take over their property insurance. Look, do I care about the issue? Yeah, I care about the issue. I'm about to pay $9,000 a year more for property insurance.
That's the 30 seconds. Thank you, Senator. We're going to move on to the next question. This question goes to you, Senator. 5 days ago, the Parkland mass shooter who killed 17 people at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School avoided the death penalty. That shooter and the killer who took 8 lives at an Indiana FedEx facility last year were both 19 years old when they killed. The killers in this year's mass shootings in Buffalo and Uvalde, Texas, were both 18. All used legally purchased AR-style rifles. In the nationally televised CNN town hall 3 days after the Parkland massacre, you said, quote, "If you are 18 years of age, you should not be able to buy a rifle. I will support a law that takes that right away." Would you still support that federal law?
Let me tell you why that law doesn't work and why that proposal doesn't work. We had a shooter last Thursday, tragic, in North Carolina. He was 15. Where did he get the gun? He didn't get it from a gun show. He certainly didn't buy it. He's 15 years of age. We've had shootings in the state. Pulse was a terrorist attack. A licensed security guard with a permit to carry firearms, extensive background check. The guy in Parkland, this killer, everybody knew who it was. Even before they announced who the person was, everybody in the community knew who it was because this guy had long problems. He'd been acting up for a long time and everybody knew it. And here's what happened. The sheriff did nothing about it. The school district did nothing about it because they didn't want to arrest kids and fell through the cracks. Even the FBI cracks it fell through. So that's why one of the first things I did when I got back to Washington is I sponsored a bipartisan red flag law, styled after Florida, not the crazy one they just passed, a real red flag law that would allow the police department to go before a judge and remove your guns if they can prove that you are a danger. The one they passed allows some coworker that doesn't like you to go to some liberal judge and take away your Second Amendment rights. So I think the solution to this problem is to identify these people that are acting this way and stop them before they act.
I want to stop you here, Senator, but before I go to Congresswoman Demings, I want to make sure that I understand that what you said in 2018 is not what you believe is the solution today.
I do not believe
there should not be a ban on 18 or 19 or 20-year-olds
a 15-year-old just got a gun, got a shotgun.
But that's one case. I just want to make sure.
No, it's more than one case. But one in Connecticut also involved the exact same thing.
We could do this all night, but I want to make sure that you don't support that anymore. It is an important point.
Denying the right to buy it is not going to keep them from doing it. Here's the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is why are these kids, why are these people going out there and massacring people?
This is the same.
Because a lot of people own AR-15s and they don't kill everyone.
I understand, sir, but I want to go to Congresswoman Demings for 60 seconds.
You know, people who are the families of victims of gun violence just heard that, and they're asking themselves, what in the hell did he just say? Senator, you used the Pulse nightclub shooting as your inspiration to run again for the Senate in 2016. Pulse is in my district. And yet, you've done nothing to help address gun violence and get dangerous weapons out of the hands of dangerous people. Florida, after Parkland, after you made promises that you had no intentions on keeping to the parents of Parkland, Florida passed legislation raising the age to have an assault weapon, passed red flag laws that we've seen 7,000 plus instances where they've been used now. Our primary responsibility is the safety of Floridians. And Senator, 24 years in elected office, and you have not yet risen to that occasion. And then when asked about it, you say something that makes no sense.
All right, Congresswoman, thank you. Senator, 30-second rebuttal from you.
Yeah, what makes no sense is that we're going to actually pass laws that only law-abiding people will follow and criminals will continue to violate. The truth of the matter is, at the end of the day, that Americans have a Second Amendment right to protect themselves. They have, and these killers that are out there, if they're intent on killing as they are, they have found multiple ways to get a hold of weapons and cause mass destruction. Just the other day, he used a shotgun, which would have been covered by any of these restrictions. I have a bipartisan red flag law sponsored with Senator Jack Reed. But the problem is that the leftists in the Senate and in the House, like Congresswoman Demings, are against it because they want the California red flag law that allows your coworker has a grudge against you and can go to a judge and take away your guns. That I'll never support.
That's the 30. I'm going to overlook Senator-elect Demings. We're going to just blow by that.
Elect. I said Senate and then
I
said
Congresswoman Demings.
Yeah, thank you. Look, every time we talk about responsible gun ownership and legislation that could help protect lives, you pull the Second Amendment out. My father was a gun owner. Has nothing to do with the Second Amendment. This is about taking dangerous guns out of the hands of dangerous people. And the overwhelming majority of people in our nation want us to do just that. How long will you watch people being gunned down in first grade, fourth grade, high school, college, church, synagogue, a grocery store, a movie theater, a mall, and a nightclub,
Congresswoman,
and do nothing?
That is time. I want to give you 30 more seconds, Senator.
Well, everything she's for would have done nothing to stop any of these shootings. Every one of these shooters would have passed the background check that she keeps insisting on. No one here is in favor of mass shootings and violence. And that's why she says we did nothing. That's not accurate. The truth, today, you go to the Department of Homeland Security website, and there's a clearinghouse. She's going to mock it. She shouldn't, because the idea came from a Parkland father. And there's a clearinghouse there that basically tells schools, for example, this is what works for safety and this is what doesn't. And we got that put in there. You know who's trying to take that down? The Biden administration. Because they say that to have a school safety clearinghouse is discriminatory against minority students.
30 more seconds,
Clearinghouse
Congresswoman.
is fine. But Senator Rubio thought that he could reduce this very critical issue to supporting a clearinghouse on the Homeland Security website. And he thought he would get a pass for the mass shootings that we've had in our state and doing nothing significant to do anything about it. Your primary responsibility, Senator, is to protect the safety of the people that you represent.
We just passed the bill they wanted, and there was a shooting a week later, and a week after that.
Why don't we just stop arresting murderers?
The only people that follow these laws are law-abiding citizens.
A rapist,
we are out of
a
time on
robber.
this issue, and in this half of this debate, we've reached halftime, and it is brief. So everybody stay tuned. We have many more issues to get to. You are watching Decision 2022, the U.S. Senate debate for Florida.
Palm Beach State College, 90 years of preparing top graduates who are industry leaders across Florida and the nation. Find your power at Palm Beach State College.
Vladimir, intensa primera mitad de este debate por ese escaño representando a Florida en el Senado de los Estados Unidos entre el senador Marco Rubio y la congresista Val Demings. ¿Cuál es tu lectura de esta primera mitad intensa, Vlad?
Tal cual lo que has dicho. No ha habido oportunidad de aguantar siquiera el aliento. Una primera tanda de debate sumamente intensa. Te confieso, no sé por dónde comenzar, porque la primera pregunta arranca hablando justamente del tema y del drama que ocurrió tras el huracán Ian y todo eso aguas abajo, lo que significa con Flood Insurance o el seguro para inundaciones, entre otras. Se tocó el tema de la crisis económica y de la ayuda federal. Se criticó, por supuesto, a la congresista Val Demings por apoyar la medida que habíamos dicho, trillonaria del presidente Biden. Pero en la segunda parte de lo que va de debate, vemos una Val Demings bastante bien posicionada que ha decidido responder con mucha fuerza, con mucha solvencia al senador Marco Rubio, a quien, por cierto, dijo algo muy particular. Ella decía que ella recordaba a un Marco Rubio que no necesitaba mentir para ganar una elección y que ella extrañaba, palabras más, palabras menos, extrañaba ese tiempo. Posterior a eso, se habló aquí está justamente, se habló del tema del aborto, que lo habíamos comentado acá. Ella fue muy vehemente diciendo que como oficial de policía, ella fue testigo de violaciones, de incestos, y ella sabe de lo que está hablando y por supuesto está en contra de la medida, una medida que dijo el propio Rubio.
Y estamos de regreso, Vladimir. Gracias por esa primera lectura y regresamos a este debate.
We touched on a lot of very important emotional issues, and there are many more in this half hour. Senator Rubio, I want to direct this next question to you. This week, the Biden administration changed its policy. Now Venezuelans who cross the southern border will be sent back to Mexico and banned from ever applying for asylum in this country. Do you support that?
You mean Joe Biden just instituted Trump's return to Mexico policy?
There's more to it, but it's
well,
the ban on ever applying.
That's exactly what he did. Look, Congresswoman Demings says that what's happening at the border is nothing unusual. We have 5,000 people a day crossing the border. You know how many people have entered our country illegally since Joe Biden took over as president? 5 million. You know how many have entered this country just in the last 12 months? 2 million. 80 of them on the terror watch list. At least, according to the most generous numbers, at least 1%, meaning 20,000, with serious criminal violations in their record. No country in the world, no one has done more on the issue of Venezuela than I have, and Cuba, and Nicaragua. I sympathize deeply with everything these people are facing, and I blame Maduro for that. But there's no country in the world that can tolerate or permit or afford 5,000 people a day arriving at your border, saying the magic words, and getting asylum. And she says that's not a problem. She says there's nothing unusual about it. This cannot continue. It has to be fixed. He needs not just to do that, that needs to happen with everyone that's trying to come across, or we're going to have 10,000 people a day coming, and we can't afford, no country in the world can tolerate that.
That's time. Congresswoman, I want to give you, this is not a rebuttal, this is the entire 60 seconds as we continue this discussion, and I want to ask you about solutions. Specifically, what solutions do you have for solving the crisis at our southern border?
We are a nation of laws. I've enforced them for 27 years. Despite what the senator wants you to believe, he's living in fantasy land. I've enforced them. And we need to make sure that the men and women at the borders have the resources that they need. I am a fan of boots on the ground. Let's have more boots on the ground, but let's also hire more processors so that we can separate those who need to be arrested from those who are seeking asylum. We're a nation of laws, but we have to enforce the law, but we also obey the law that says people who are in trouble can seek asylum in this country. And so more boots on the ground, more technology, more processors. Let's secure our border. The senator likes to talk about open borders. It's almost an insult to the men and women who are there securing the border. But let's get more agents to help at the border. We can do this.
If I may respond to that. Number one, the only one who's insulted the people working the border are Joe Biden and Democrats who accused them of whipping Haitian migrants, and that turned out not to be true. Number two, she opposed the border wall. She supported this thing called the People's Budget, which I call the crazy people's budget because it had a bunch of crazy stuff in it. Even Charlie Crist voted against it, and that absolutely zeroed out and banned border funding. She talks about more processors. I want you to think about what that means. What that means is now, when someone crosses the border, turns himself in, claims asylum, they're usually held in detention for 2 to 3 days while they process it. What she's arguing is, let's hire more processors so we can get them through faster. So we can push people through instead of 1 day to 3 day detention,
Let me stop
no day
you there,
detention.
Senator,
This can't continue. We have to stop.
Let's ask the Congresswoman to respond to that. You have 30 seconds, Congresswoman.
If we have more processors and they don't meet the standard for asylum seekers, you send them back. Yes, we need to secure our border more. I think we can do that with technology, more boots on the ground, and more people to process those who need to be turned back, those who are breaking the law, from those who are asylum seekers. Senator, enforce the law, but also obey the law as well.
Which boots does she want on the ground? She was against National Guard deployment. They demonized the Border Patrol. And they talk about processors.
Who are you talking about, Senator?
Well, your party.
Who demonized the...
You have, and your party has,
That's
Congresswoman.
a lie.
Absolutely true. And let me tell you something else that they've done. Here's the other thing they've done. They talk about more processors.
Would you be willing to do anything to win, Senator?
They talk about more processors. Okay, so people, everybody, the Biden administration, all you have to
making
do
it
is
up.
say the magic words.
You're making it up. Stop.
This has devolved. I want to move on to the next issue here, Senator.
The traffickers give you the magic words. You say and they let you in.
Congresswoman,
More processors
I
to let
am
them in.
forced to move on at this time.
How gullible do you think people are?
The next question is going to come from Vicki Seshary from Florida Trends Magazine. Vicki?
Representative Demings, last year you backed legislation that increased Social Security benefits and would require high-wage earners to pay more in Social Security taxes. Why should Congress raise taxes to pay for a broken system?
Well, number one, we have to think about what the promise of Social Security was. It was to keep our seniors out of poverty. And you know, being in elected office and the critical position of being a United States senator, It is about making choices to protect people. I believe that we've got to do everything within our power to protect those who have had to go to work every day and deserve to be able to retire with dignity and respect. Governing is about priorities, and Social Security and protecting it is a priority for me. I'm not going to sacrifice it, and we need to do what we need to do, whatever that is, to protect it. We can do that.
Follow-up question for Senator Rubio. Florida's junior Senator Rick Scott proposed 11-point plan to rescue America requires, quote, all federal legislation to sunset in 5 years. If a law is worth keeping, Congress can pass it again, Senator Scott says. That includes Medicare, Social Security, and VA benefits. Do you support putting these federal entitlements on a chopping block every 5 years?
No, and that's not my plan. That's Senator Scott. He's doing a great job. He's not very shy. You should ask him. He's more than happy to talk to you about his plan. I can tell you, on the other hand, if you want to talk about radical plans, Congresswoman Demings supported a radical plan. I already mentioned earlier the people's budget. Let me tell you the other gems in that budget. It raised $9 trillion in taxes. $9 trillion in taxes. I already told you about the $10.25 tax on a barrel of oil, which would have meant a 35-cent increase on the gas prices you're already paying right now. Let me tell you what else it did. It zeroed out the war on terror. It took $1 billion out of the Pentagon. This is crazy stuff. And that's not a plan. She voted for it. She didn't just put her name on it. She actually voted for the crazy people's budget, a socialist budget. She voted for it. I don't even know if she remembers she voted for it.
I hadn't seen the socialist budget.
Well, you voted for the people's budget, and it's a socialist budget. Trust me when I tell you that any budget
crazy,
that zeroes out the war on terror,
Marxist,
takes $1 trillion out of the Pentagon, okay, raises taxes by $8 trillion on working Americans, is a socialist budget. And she didn't just have her name on it, she voted for it.
That's your time. Congresswoman Demings, 30 seconds to you.
Senator, you're repeating yourself again. We've seen this show before. Socialists, crazy, Marxist, silly.
Well, which one
that
does
must
she
be
prefer?
on your list for your talking points. The bottom line is you said that Rick Scott's plan, it's good to have good ideas. You did not say that you did not support it. I hear you saying that tonight, but when you were first asked about his plan, you said, I think it's good to have good ideas. You remember that?
Congresswoman, Senator, you can respond.
Yeah, that's Rick Scott's plan. He can defend it, he can talk about it. Her name was on that.
The question
people's
was,
budget.
what do you think
the
about
people's budget? The people's budget had her name on it. She was not just a co-sponsor 2 years in a row. She voted for it. There's never been a vote on Rick Scott's budget. She voted for this thing. $8 trillion in taxes, 8 or 9 trillion, I can't remember at this point. What's another trillion, right? You talk about all the other things that were in there. A $10.25 tax on a barrel of oil so that your prices go up by 35 cents. I don't know what word you prefer, socialist, Marxist, crazy. I don't know. I'm open to suggestions about how we describe
Demings,
such a nutty idea
Senator,
that would destroy the country.
Congresswoman Demings.
He's talking about the barrel of oil again.
Yeah, everyone's talking about the barrel of oil these days.
Look, you've been in elected office in Florida for 24 years. And what we have been left with is skyrocketing property insurance, lack of affordable housing, health care, gone through the roof. We haven't expanded Medicaid. People are hurting. And you know what, Senator, when I talk to your voters around the state, you know what they say? They don't know what you stand for.
All right, Congresswoman, that's your time, and I'm going to move on to the next. We've spent a certain amount of time. I thank you both. I know this had a lot to discuss, but let's move on.
All right.
Congresswoman, this is going to go first to you. President Biden says the world is closer to nuclear Armageddon than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis exactly 60 years ago this month. 3 times in the last week, Vladimir Putin has ordered Russian missile attacks on Ukrainian cities, targeting and killing civilians. If Russia next fires a limited-range tactical nuclear device at Ukraine, or strikes a NATO ally like Poland, even with a conventional weapon, what's the correct response by the Biden White House and NATO?
Well, we have to hold those who are not our friends accountable. And Senator, that does include Russia. It's not just China. Russia has attacked our friend Ukraine, what they thought was going to be over in a few days, as you know, has been going on for almost a year. We have to continue to support Ukraine and our NATO allies. Of course, we've got to hold Russia accountable. We always use diplomacy around the NATO table. We cannot afford to have a nuclear attack. And the United States has to do everything in its power to prevent that from happening.
Senator, same question to you.
Well, on the first point about Vladimir Putin, I was against Vladimir Putin before being against Vladimir Putin was cool. I mean, and I remember that very well because Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration tried to reset relations with him. Now, I'm not sure the president had to do it over again. He would choose the words Armageddon or Cuban Missile Crisis, but there's no doubt about this. Vladimir Putin is losing this war, and if he loses the war, he'll lose his position. And you know, I don't think the retirement plan for former Russian dictator presidents is a very good one. So I think he's very concerned about that. So I do think we have to be very wary, and I've warned about this from the beginning, about what he might do to escalate. One is the use of a tactical weapon, which is not a strategic weapon. We're not talking about him launching a missile against Chicago or New York, but we are talking about the use of artillery shells and short-range missiles in the battlefield, which would be unprecedented. And I think the response to that has to be a unified response that perhaps takes out what it is that launched those and where those were launched from. I think the likelier scenario, and the one that really is concerning, is that he would attack, for example, an airport in Poland. At that point, NATO would have to come together and decide whether they're going to invoke Article 5, and the United States needs to live up to its NATO commitments.
Let me ask the Congresswoman, to that point, the NATO response, we know what the NATO charter says. Poland's attacked, as the senator's scenario says, perhaps the airport. What is the response from the United States as well as NATO?
We have to do everything within our power to protect our NATO allies. Everything within our power. If Poland is attacked, then there has to be an immediate response. And I believe between our military and the Department of Defense and our experts and our intelligence community, based on the intelligence on the ground, I believe that that response will be sufficient and swift, but we've got to leave it in the hands of the people who are there and the people who are involved in this every day, with the ultimate goal of keeping America safe and keeping our allies, our NATO friends, safe.
All right, Senator, I have 30 more seconds.
Well, just to add, I think the response needs to be proportional. And what I mean by that is that the NATO alliance will have to meet, and this can't be unilateral. The NATO alliance will have to meet and decide what is a proportional response, and that would depend on the nature and level of the attack. But it has to be an allied response, not simply a U.S. one. That's what's most critical here. It's not anything at our disposal, because we're not talking about the use of strategic weapons or starting World War III, but there needs to be one. I would argue to you tonight that they've already attacked NATO, because the Nord Stream pipeline underwater that supplies Germany from Russia has been bombed. It was bombed, and everyone's wondering, I saw a news report, well, they're saying Russia may have done it. Well, who else did it? Luxembourg, Belgium?
Senator, can you wrap this up in 10 seconds? I need to move on.
All right.
We good?
Yep.
All right, I want to go back to Rick Christie from the Palm Beach Post. Rick?
Congresswoman Demings, Senator Rubio has called Democrats' attempts to pass a new federal voting rights law an effort to, quote, ram through an election law to make sure you never lose power, to make it easier for Democrats to win. Why are new federal protections of voting rights needed?
Well, let me say this. I'm not the person standing on the stage who supports suppressing the right to vote. Look, I can think about the words of my friend and former colleague, John Lewis, who said the right to vote is precious, that is almost sacred. And the senator thinks that we should leave that up to the states. Well, we tried that with voting rights, and we know the bad actors who did some ungodly things to stop people from voting. So we should not just protect the right for a few people or the privileged few, we should protect voting rights for everyone. And we need a federal law to keep everybody accountable. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is sitting in the Senate right now, waiting for a vote. The Freedom to Vote Act, which will help protect the right to vote for all people, is sitting in the Senate right now, waiting for a vote. That is our duty and responsibility, to allow the people to vote.
That's time. Rick, I know you have another question.
This question is for you, Senator Rubio. In January, you wrote in The Federalist that Democrats' push for voting rights is about, again, quote, exaggerated problems and imaginary fears, unquote. Can you give us specifics on what you mean by that?
Sure. It's never been easier to
Please.
vote.
I'm sorry? I
It's
didn't hear.
never been easier to vote. It's
Okay.
never been easier to vote. In Florida, you can now vote by mail for any reason. You can vote, for example, 10 days before the election. You can vote on Election Day. In Georgia, which they claim to be the place that was suppressing all the votes, you had record African-American voter turnout. To compare what's happening now to the Jim Crow era, where people were literally murdered, where people were forced to take poll taxes and pay poll taxes and literacy tests, what are we talking about here? We're talking about this. We're talking about, number one, when you go vote, you show an ID. I have been a Hispanic man my entire life. I'm a minority. I've never felt like producing an ID disadvantages my ability to vote. Everyone has an ID. You can't even check into a hotel. You can't buy Sudafed at Walgreens without an ID. That's number one. Number two is you can't collect a bunch of ballots. Harvesting of ballots. Cars showing up with tons of ballots sitting in the trunk of a car. Things like that they want to force down the throat of every state in the country. We don't need that federal law imposed on every state. Florida has very good election laws. And other states have very good election laws. And the states that don't have very good election laws are the states that actually have gone in the opposite direction of weakening security for the ballot.
All right, Senator, thank you. Congressman, I want to go back to you for 60 seconds.
Florida has an election law police force, and if the laws are so wonderful, what's the need for that? Florida also eliminated the number of drop boxes from 2020. Why do that, particularly in certain areas, Senator? Your job is to make sure that every person votes. The ones who may vote for you and the ones who may not vote for you. That is your responsibility. So if it's so perfect, why the adjustments? We need to hold states accountable to make sure every person, although that scares the senator to death, has the right, the precious right, to cast their vote.
Senator.
Yeah. I'm trying to suppress the vote, and I'm wasting a lot of money telling people to go out and vote. Because that's what my campaign has been all about. Number two, I've never supported any suppression effort. Listen, we've had laws in this state. How come all of a sudden a drop box is the standard by which we judge whether people are being allowed to vote or not? We didn't have drop boxes 10 years ago. We didn't have drop boxes in 2016 when the Congresswoman was first elected to Congress. We didn't have drop boxes in 2012 when Barack Obama won the state of Florida running for president. That's a method of voting that doesn't advantage one group or another. There's danger involved in drop boxes. People need to think about it. Okay, imagine if someone decides, oh, there's a drop box. I'm just going to put some explosive in it and blow it up and burn all of those ballots, and now those votes don't count at all. Okay, there is something, with elections, there are two things that are very important. Number one, the count has to be accurate. The votes have to be counted accurately. But the other is there has to be public confidence. The public has to believe that the elections were fair and balanced, and that's what I've always been in favor of. But what they want is a federal takeover of the elections. I do not want a federal takeover of our election system. I oppose it.
That's time, Senator. Congresswoman?
That's nonsense.
Okay.
That we want a federal takeover. We passed the Voting Rights Advancement Act in the House of Representatives because of the unbelievable voter suppression efforts that were going on by the senator and his party.
Well, which voter
Let
suppression vote was that?
people vote. That's nonsense, what he just said. We want every person to vote. And Senator, we've been busy too, encouraging people to vote. It doesn't threaten me. It doesn't scare me to let the people vote.
And that's time. I want to move on to another issue. We are coming close to the end of the debate. I want to make sure you both get all your time for closing statements. This is going to go to you first, Congresswoman. The Biden National Security Plan identifies Russia as an imminent danger and China as the greatest long-term threat. Given President Xi's comments Monday that included threats to Taiwan, what should U.S. policy be with China moving forward from here?
We've got to hold China accountable. We've got to hold them accountable for the violations of our intellectual property. We've got to hold them accountable for look, the bottom line is the United States is the world power. We're the most powerful nation in the world. We know that China has not been the best player, the best actor, and we have to hold them accountable. What President Xi said about possibly taking Taiwan by force, that is totally against our principles and our values, and we have to take action if there's any serious effort to do that. Look, I serve on the Intelligence Committee as well as the senator does. That is something that we have been monitoring just about every day. If China makes any aggressive actions, deliberate actions to take Taiwan, then there has to be a response from the United States.
Senator?
Yeah, first of all, I would say that there's a fact, every major anti-China proposal that has been voted on in the last 5 years have been my bill. So much so that China has actually sanctioned and banned me. And I was very upset about that because I had to cancel my vacation in Wuhan. So, but all kidding aside, the 21st century will be defined by the relationship between the United States and China. We wasted 20 years thinking that once China got rich and prosperous, they would become like us, and we woke up into a world where they don't want to become like us, they want to replace us. We made one mistake. Number one, we allowed American manufacturing to leave this country and go to China. And so today, they own the manufacturing capacity. 88% of pharmaceuticals come from there. So that's why I've worked on things like bringing the pharmaceutical industry back to the United States, particularly Puerto Rico, and I have a bill that will do that. The second thing is we have to begin to invest in our military, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region, to defeat the weapon systems they're innovating. We don't need the Pentagon spending all its time producing videos on the proper use of pronouns. We need them focused on how to blow up aircraft carriers made by China.
Thank you. Congresswoman, number 30 to you.
The bottom line is we have to hold China.
I'd ask the audience to please respect the candidates' statements.
The bottom line is we have to hold China accountable. And your question involved their takeover of Taiwan. We have to make sure that that does not happen. And as a member of the Intelligence Committee, that is an issue that we are studying every day to make sure that does not happen. Look, the senator can play national security expert all he wants. I know he needs that for his next presidential run.
Congresswoman, I need to stop you there, and I want to give, because you mentioned the senator, another 30 seconds to the senator.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what she means by play national security expert. I'm the vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee and was the previous chairman of it, so it's actually my job. But the second thing I would say is I think holding China accountable, that's a talking point. I get it. I'm supporting the concept. It's a great banner. I'm sure it's a good bumper sticker. But it's not a plan. I actually have a detailed plan for how you address it. And one of the things we have to do, you want to hold China accountable, fix this country first. Make things in America again. Because you think things are bad now? Imagine the day you wake up and realize we can't get medicine because the Chinese have cut us off. We can't get gas because they have all the refineries.
You off, Senator. 15 more seconds to the Congresswoman.
The senator voted against the CHIPS Act. He goes around the state talking a lot about our dependency on China because of semiconductors, and then he voted against the CHIPS Act. That would help further America's independence.
And that is time for both of you because you're going to get it's a gift, full time for closing statements. Senator Rubio, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for hosting this debate tonight. I'm glad people got a chance to see that elections are about a choice. Look, I've been in Washington now for 2 terms in the Senate, and in the 2 terms I've been there, no U.S. senator has gotten more done than I have. Today, parents in Florida whose child have pediatric cancer will have options because I took on the pharmaceutical companies and passed the bill that forced that. The child tax credit doubled because I passed the bill that did that. Veterans that were exposed to toxic burn pits will now get treatment at the VA and not have to fight with the VA because we just passed a bill that I sponsored, all of these bipartisan, to make that happen. And millions of American small businesses and millions of American small business jobs were saved because of a bill we passed. And so I'm asking for a chance to continue that work because I have a record of not just identifying the problems, but fixing it. And my opponent has been in Congress now for half a decade and has never passed a single piece of legislation into law, not one. The only thing she does is vote 100% with Pelosi. The vote is clear, and I'm asking voters for their support. Thank you.
Right on time, Senator. Congresswoman Demings.
Todd, I wasn't going to start my closing arguments with the last couple of things the senator said were just not true. And let me say this. I stand on this stage tonight as the daughter of a maid and a janitor. Had the awesome honor of being the first in my family to graduate college, served at the police department, worked my way up through the ranks to become the chief of police, serving in the House and now running for the Senate. Only in America is my story possible. I just happen to believe that every person, regardless of who they are, deserves the opportunity to succeed, deserves the opportunity to make it. The senator will pick and choose winners and losers based on their ability to pay to play. He talked about pharmaceuticals. He voted against legislation that would help reduce the cost of prescription drugs and help cap the cost of insulin.
That is time. Senator, Congressman, thank you both so much for participating in this. We want to thank our audience across the state of Florida and on the internet right now for this. This will also be rebroadcast on C-SPAN. Election Day is November 8th, and early voting begins next week. Thanks for watching. Good night.
Vladimir Kislinger, tu lectura rápidamente de este primer y único debate entre la congresista Val Demings y el senador Marco Rubio. ¿Cuál es tu lectura, Vladimir?
No se salieron de la agenda de lo que se esperaba que hablaran, lo hicieron, hablaron del control de armas, una crítica muy fuerte por parte de Val Demings en contra del senador Marco Rubio, por lo que ella considera ha sido inacciones por parte del senador en torno a la protección, así dijo ella, de su propia gente, de los floridanos. También hablaron del Seguro Social, de la administración del Seguro Social y las promesas incumplidas, el tema económico y el paquete de Biden, que fue muy criticado por parte de Marco Rubio y por supuesto metió en toda la crítica a Val Demings. También tuvimos oportunidad de ver una discusión acalorada entre Marco Rubio y Val Demings en torno al tema migratorio. Rubio dijo que, por ejemplo, han ingresado desde que Biden es presidente de los Estados Unidos 5 millones de personas. En los últimos 12 meses han ingresado 2. Dice que de esas 5 millones de personas, al menos 80 están en la lista de posibles terroristas internacionales y por lo menos el 1% de esos 5 millones tienen en sus récords violaciones serias desde el punto de vista criminal. Un debate polémico, sin duda alguna.
Y déjame detenerte justo con ese punto, el tema de migración. ¿Cuál es la postura que mostraron ambos candidatos, la congresista Demings, con ese enfoque de boots on the ground, y el senador Rubio con un concepto un poco más estratégico de fronteras abiertas, que es lo que ha mantenido a lo largo de toda su campaña y tratando de seguir esa línea republicana?
No, bueno, la línea republicana está en contra de las fronteras abiertas, diametralmente en contra de las fronteras. La diferencia que se presenta acá es que Val Demings dice que necesita más recursos para tener mayor cantidad de oficiales procesando posibles casos de asilo, y habla de ese boots on the ground, hablando de oficiales de CBP, que es la patrulla fronteriza. Sin embargo, el senador Rubio salió al paso y dijo, hey, pero tú, refiriéndose a Demings, tú te rechazaste la postura del Partido Republicano y de los senadores que habían pedido que la Guardia Nacional de los Estados Unidos fuera a la frontera para protegerla. Ambos dicen que se tiene que proteger, ambos dicen que se tiene que mejorar en el sistema fronterizo, pero cada uno, digamos, defiende su orientación. Incluso Rubio se burló de Biden porque dijo, ¿a qué pregunta te refieres? ¿A la de la reaplicación de una medida que Biden había desmontado y que que Biden desmontó, que era de Trump, y otra vez la está colocando? Fue parte de las críticas que, por ejemplo, lanzó Marco Rubio contra Demings.
¿Qué me dices fueron en cuatro ocasiones que se trató el tema económico en este debate? Abrieron el debate, de hecho, con poca emoción, con las dos primeras preguntas. ¿Qué nos quiere decir esto? Empezaron definitivamente hablando del huracán Ian y cómo ha afectado al estado de la Florida. Luego se saltaron a los gastos durante y después de la pandemia. También se mencionó la crisis que se vive de la propiedad, de seguros de propiedad en Florida. Y por último, el apoyo en cuanto a los beneficios de Medicare, el Seguro Social y el VA.
Yo creo que hay una diferencia fundamental de concepto entre los republicanos y los demócratas. Y es un principio que yo he escuchado millones de veces en distintos lugares. La diferencia entre el estado pequeño y el estado grande. La posición de los republicanos es tener un estado pequeño y una economía grande. La posición de algunos demócratas, no todos, es tener un estado que tenga la oportunidad de incidir de manera directa. Y de hecho el propio Marco Rubio dijo, hey, tú no quieres que el estado esté metido en tu seguro de casa, en tu seguro de inundación, porque sería lo peor, él decía. En el caso de Demings, dice o criticó que el senador Marco Rubio realmente no ha legislado para incidir de manera definitiva en términos como estos, en términos de los seguros para viviendas, en términos de la seguridad social y de los beneficios como el Medicaid y el Medicare, y por supuesto terminó hablando de otra vez el tema del control de armas y criticando muy fuertemente, diciéndole, senador, usted tiene que procurar cuidar a sus electores, no estar tan concentrado en Washington, D.C. y estar más concentrado en la Florida. Palabras de la propia congresista y candidata al Senado, Val Demings.
Y pusieron en contexto la sentencia que acaba de recibir el mismo Nicolás Cruz. Mencionaron los tiroteos de Uvalde, diferentes situaciones que han involucrado a un tirador activo y las políticas que se centran alrededor de este tipo de incidentes. También se centraron un poco en el tema de las elecciones y volviendo a lo que tú mencionas, de centralizar todo en el sistema federal o estatal. La misma cuestión, el problema, la crisis de los seguros de propiedad. El senador Rubio dice que él no quiere al gobierno federal involucrado a nivel estatal para solucionar esa crisis de seguros. Lo mismo con las elecciones. Quiere él mantener la soberanía estatal para mantener el control en estos dos temas, tanto elecciones como la propiedad de seguros. ¿Cuál es tu lectura en eso?
Bueno, me hace recordar, y aquí es importante siempre traer el pasado, hablar de lo que significó Donald Trump en las elecciones pasadas y la crítica que hay contra él cuando intentó irse contra los estados de manera directa cuando las elecciones. Es un tema muy delicado, pero es un tema que ocurrió en efecto. Nada, hablar del tema de los seguros, si el senador Marco Rubio no quiere al gobierno federal actuando de manera directa, pues entonces queda en manos justamente del Senado de los Estados Unidos para que legisle y procure proteger a los homeowners, a los propietarios de vivienda, para que puedan tener no solamente sus seguros, sino que puedan cobrarlos también. Por ejemplo, él daba un ejemplo, él daba una cifra, él decía, mira, de los reclamos para reemplazo de techos, Florida representa el 9% del total del país, pero en los litigios, en los juicios, representa el 80% de los litigios. Por lo tanto, dice Rubio, las empresas han querido salir de acá porque terminan quebradas. Y en cierto modo eso es lo que hemos visto nosotros justamente acá en WFLA cuando hemos cubierto este tipo de situaciones que se presentan. Así que control, mayor o menor control federal. Por otro lado, ¿qué tipo de acciones se deben tomar desde el punto de vista económico? Tercer lugar, ¿qué se debe hacer en términos migratorios? Y estén muy atentos al cierre de lo que les voy a comentar. Cuarto lugar, el tema del control de armas. Quinto lugar, el tema del aborto, que también lo vimos acá. Pero todo quedó en una exposición de motivos que ustedes, Gerardo y yo, conocemos. Muy poco se habló de soluciones, muy poco se habló de qué se haría desde el Senado, cómo se podría resolver desde el Senado. Y aquí hablo de los dos candidatos. Por lo menos en mi caso quedé con un sinsabor esperando a que me dijeran, por ejemplo, cómo atacar el problema de los tiroteos masivos que han dejado a cientos, a miles de personas a lo largo de la historia de los Estados Unidos fallecidas. O, por ejemplo, cómo resolver el problema de la frontera, cuidando también a aquellos desfavorecidos que necesitan venir y necesitan pedir un asilo, pero cuidando también la seguridad nacional. Nada de esto ocurrió. Nos quedamos otra vez en el diagnóstico, pero no en la medicina.
Simplemente se centraron en el panorama, no en cuestiones puntuales. También cómo bajar la inflación. tú bien lo definiste, respuestas bastante vagas, y tú mencionas otro punto que lo trataron en dos preguntas diferentes, el tema de seguridad nacional, Rusia y China, ¿cuál va a ser el enfoque que va a tener a nivel federal la respuesta en un caso de que Rusia llegue a atacar a algún aliado de la OTAN, y el control que puede estar teniendo China en el futuro? Y el senador Rubio dijo algo muy interesante, que el siglo XXI va a estar definido por las relaciones que definan China y Estados Unidos.
Sin duda alguna. Ya hablar de Rusia es hablar de pasado. Independientemente de que Rusia esté en este momento en un conflicto bélico con Ucrania y esté amenazando al occidente, Rusia es un periódico de ayer, como una canción de salsa de nuestros países. Pero en el caso de China, sigue marcando el pulso junto a Estados Unidos. Hay que estar muy atentos a lo que ocurre en términos económicos. Una China en la cual, por cierto, hay un rebrote por ahí preocupante de COVID de nuevo en algunas regiones de China, y una China que, por supuesto, ha dado muchos dolores de cabeza últimamente, sin contar con que está la amenaza latente de tomar Taiwán, que es prácticamente un hecho.
Definitivamente, Vladimir, y la invitación la dejamos abierta para la próxima semana. Me parece que es el próximo lunes que vamos a tener la misma dinámica, pero vamos a tener el debate por esa silla que tanto se está disputando, y una otra contienda muy reñida en el estado de la Florida, que es por la posición del gobernador de la Florida, entre el actual gobernador Ron DeSantis y un candidato que ya fue gobernador de la Florida, Charlie Crist.
Y que ya fue republicano y ahora es demócrata. Exactamente.
Ambos, dos figuras políticas conocidas de la Florida y que han estado en el espectro político. Otro debate muy interesante. Para cerrar esto rápidamente, ¿quién tú crees que ganó este debate, Vladimir?
Yo creo que hubo un empate. Sin duda alguna creo que hubo un empate. Cada uno ganó en temas distintos, pero hechas las sumas y las restas, no creo que alguien haya sobresalido. No sé cuál es tu opinión.
Me parece que el senador Marco Rubio, con la manera y su experiencia al estar al frente del Senado de los Estados Unidos, involucrado en diferentes temas, tal vez esa parte de la experiencia en Washington a otro nivel, tal vez por ese lado está un poquito arriba de lo que demostró Val Demings la noche de hoy.
Y mañana lo sabremos con las encuestas.
Y mañana lo sabremos definitivamente. Y para todo eso, todos los recursos los puede encontrar en tampahoy.com. Vladimir, y tú vas a estar también hoy por la noche en Noticias Tampa Hoy, compartiendo un poco los resultados y las impresiones de lo que sucedió en este debate. Hoy a las 9 de la noche por Grade 38. Gracias a usted que nos ha sintonizado por nuestras plataformas digitales, y la invitación nuevamente la hago para la próxima semana para que no se pierda el debate por la silla de gobernación en el estado de la Florida entre el gobernador DeSantis y el exgobernador Charlie Crist. Muchísimas gracias por sintonizar.